Hey there, thanks for joining me today. I'm Marley with the site Namely Marley. Did you know you could make a perfectly buttery loaf of bread with only 6 ingredients? This is the proof, and I'm going to show you how to make it. And stay tuned because I'm going to show you one of my favorite add-ins. Actually, I have two favorite add-ins. You can just add for extra flavor and a little bit of color too. So back to this in a minute. Let's talk about those magic 6 ingredients because you really only need six. I just still can't get over it myself that you only need 6 ingredients, but let's just go over this. Flour is number one. We'll use a little bit of brown sugar. Got a quarter cup of vegan butter, salt, baking powder, and the magic ingredient is a can of beer. Yes, this is beer bread, and I am just shocked at how delicious it is, and I love the flavor. So what I wanted to share with you on how to make this, we're going to get right into it, is the very first thing is to make sure your pan is prepared because I want to get this in the oven just as soon as it's ready. And so what I do is I put a little piece of parchment paper in the bottom, and I'll just use a little bit of vegetable oil around that just to make sure it pops out really easily. So that's what we do with the pan. The very first thing I'm going to do is melt this butter. And so I'm going to put this in the microwave for about 20 seconds. And then let's get to making the batter while that's melting. So I wanted to show you how I measure flour. This recipe uses 3 cups of flour, and it's really important that we measure it correctly. So here's what I do. Actually, what I keep in my flour all the time is this chopstick. That it's a wooden chopstick that I've kind of cut off on the end, and a spoon. And I'm going to show you why. Because when I open up my flour, what happens with flour is it presses into the pan. It just settles and it kind of becomes compacted. And so I just like to give it a stir that kind of, lifts it up a little bit. You can feel it has a lot of resistance at the beginning, and after I stir it a few times, that resistance goes away. I feel like that's a pretty good sign that it's ready to be measured. And I have this really nice measuring cup that actually has a leveler on it. But if you don't have a leveler, then you can just use a butter knife to, to spoon off the flour. So what we're going to do is get some of that kind of lofty flour, and we spoon it into the measuring cup. I like to kind of use a little bit of a wiggle here to make sure that the flour is going in nice and softly. I mean, the other alternative is you can measure your flour, but I mean, we're from the United States. We don't do that. Sorry. So here I'm going to just level this off. Yeah, weigh it. What did I say? Measure. Oh, yeah, yeah. You could weigh it. So that's cup number one. This one, again, this one uses 3 cups. But the problem is if you don't measure it correctly, you'll end up with too much flour in your ingredients and in your batter, and that's not going to have the best results for you. So I think finding the right way to measure your flour is really important. And this is what I found to be the best way to measure flour. And really, what it comes down to is measuring the flour like the recipe calls for. So if your recipe um, is calls for weighing the flour, then I think you should probably do what that recipe calls for. Hopefully, you'll be following a recipe that will tell you how they measure the flour. I usually say I like to have this flour sifted, spooned, and leveled. That's what this is. We just spoon it into the measuring cup and then we level it off. So there we go, 3 cups of flour, and I only made a little bit of a mess. That's not too bad, huh? Okay, so I'm going to put this lid back on and I'm going to get the flour out of the way. And I'm going to clean off the mess that I just made. Okay, so to this, we're going to add some brown sugar. This is, I believe, a quarter cup of, let me just double check. Yeah, this is a quarter cup of brown sugar. It's not a lot. It doesn't make a sweet bread, but there is a little bit of sweetness to it. This is a teaspoon of sodium, salt. Should better word for it. And this is a tablespoon of baking powder. So that's that. And we're just going to stir this together. I like to make sure that brown sugar is mixed all around. The same thing with, the baking powder. You don't want to have a bite that has a big clump of baking powder in it. You just want to make sure it's all sifted around in here. Okay, that's pretty good. And I always like to have it so it's got a little bit of a well in the center. And I'm going to get the butter out. Looks like it's melted perfectly. That's just exactly what I wanted. And now it's time. Now let's talk a little bit about the choice of beer because there's all different flavors of beer. I like to use a pale beer because it has the least beer flavor, but at the same time, it also doesn't add any color. It keeps it a light colored, and it's also inexpensive, so that's nice too. I would, for me, I mean, I think you should experiment and see which one you like best. Just have this attitude of, hey, I'm going to try some darker beers, or I'm going to try, I personally would stay away from like a lemon shandy or things like that. But at the same time, if that's what you want to try, I think you should go for it. I have and I would suggest staying away from an IPA, but maybe they have a little bit more of a hoppy flavor to it, and therefore might be a little bit more bitter. But again, I think it's good to have an attitude of experiment in the kitchen, experimentation in the kitchen, and so that's what you should do. I'm just using just plain old Bud Light. It's nice and simple, and it's inexpensive, and it works perfectly. So let's just pour this beer in here. I'm going to show you how fun this is. Watch this. We're using the whole can. There we go. And then we just start stirring it together. That stirs pretty nicely. If you kind of let the beer do the work, you don't have to do too much with this. And we just are going to give it a rough stir to get all the flour ingredients out. You can see I don't see big clumps of flour in there, so that's good. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a couple of tablespoons of this melted butter. Look at that. Doesn't that look delicious? Doesn't that make you think, ooh, I want to eat that? You are going to think that here in a minute, I promise. Okay. So we're just going to stir that butter into this batter. Butter into the batter. That's kind of a tongue twister. And now we're ready to put this into the pan. So if you recall, I already coated this with a little bit of oil, and it's got a little piece of parchment paper in there. I love using a spatula for this recipe because that way I can get all of that out of here. Out of the batter is so delicious. We want it all. I also like leaving a little bit of rough texture on the top because that part turns golden, and I love that. I think it's really pretty. Now, I wanted to talk with you about my favorite add-ins. I did promise that, so let's go to it. What I have here is a half teaspoon of garlic powder and a little bit of parsley. This is, believe it or not, dried parsley. It's like a half teaspoon as well. And I'm going to mix that into the remaining butter. You don't have to do this. This is just a fun, like I say, it's a little bit of something extra if you wanted to do something special. And what we're going to do is just pour this over the top of this batter. Now look at that. Isn't that not beautiful? Now you may think this looks a little bit small in the pan, but it will rise up. I'm going to put this in the oven. I've got it preheated at 375. So let's just put this in the oven here. And let's go to our finished bake. Look at that. See, that's why I love kind of having the batter be a little bit, uneven on the top because you get these nice little golden edges. It's just delicious. It's a nice buttery crust all the way around. It smells delicious. Oh, it smells so good. And I just still can't get over the fact that we can do this with only 6 ingredients. I wanted to say some questions you might have is, can you freeze this? Absolutely. You can make this ahead of time and let it cool completely and then wrap it and freeze it. And it's going to be delicious for you in a week or two when you're ready to eat it. And let's see. Some people might be asking, do you really have to use a whole can of beer? Yes, absolutely. That beer is what's going to cause this nice lofty loaf, and I think you're going to love it. Um, like I say, we've talked about the different kinds of beers you can use. So I think, yeah, just go for the whole can. A lot of the alcohol will bake out, and then as a result, you've got this, delicious loaf of bread left. So I think it's time for the taste test. Let's get to it. Look at that. That is delicious looking. I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller so I can eat that. Look at that. It's nice and airy in the middle. You can see it's got a wonderful crumb. What I really like is this buttery crust. I have to be honest, it's really my favorite part is to go for that crust. Oh my God. It is so good. I mean, you can put some more butter on this, but it's just delicious the way it is. The flavor is amazing. That buttery crust, I love the crunch of it. So there's a little bit of crunch in every bite. There's a lot of buttery flavor. It's perfect. I think you could use olive oil and it would still be very, if you're worried about the saturated fat and you'd really rather go with the olive oil, you could totally do that and get away with it. It's still going to be divine. I think I could see serving this with an olive oil dipping sauce and dipping each slice in this. What I love so much is that this comes together so quickly. You can be cooking cooking the rest of your dinner. This comes out of the oven. Everybody's going to come rush into the kitchen like, what's for dinner? Because it smells so good as it's baking. Anyway, I just love it so much. Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's recipe. I really had a great time today. I hope you did too. I hope you really enjoyed this vegan beer bread. If you would love to see more quick breads, leave a heart in the comment below, and that'll tell me that you like this idea of quick breads and simple recipes like this, and I'll know that you want more. If you like today's recipe, I would love it if you would give this video a like and subscribe for more recipes coming your way every week.